20 years ago in General Conference, I related a story first told by Elder Vaughn J. Featherstone of the 70 that I believe bears repeating here. In 1918, Brother George Goetz was a farmer who raised sugar beets in Lehi, Utah. Winter came early that year and froze much of his beet crop in the ground. For George and his young son Francis, the harvest was slow and difficult. Meanwhile, an influenza epidemic was raging. The dreaded disease claimed the lives of George's son, Charles, and 3 of Charles' small children, 2 little girls and a boy. In the course of only 6 days, a grieving George Goetz made 3 separate trips to Ogden, Utah, to bring the bodies home for burial. At the end of this terrible interlude, George and Francis hitched up their wagon and headed back to the beet field. On the way, they passed wagon after wagon load of beets being hauled to the factory, driven by neighborhood farmers. As they passed by, each driver would wave a greeting, "Hiya, Uncle George." "Sure sorry, George." "Tough break, George." "You've got a lot of friends, George." On the last wagon was freckle-faced Jasper Rolfe. He waved a cheery greeting and called out, "That's all of them, Uncle George." Brother Goetz turned to Francis and said, "I wish it was all of ours." When they arrived at the farm gate, Francis jumped down off the big red beet wagon and opened the gate as his father drove onto the field. George pulled up, stopped the team, and scanned the field. There wasn't a sugar beet in the whole field. Then it dawned on him what Jasper Rolfe meant when he called out, "That's all of them, Uncle George." George got down off the wagon, picked up a handful of the rich brown soil he loved so much, and then a beet top, and he looked for a moment at these symbols of his labor as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he sat down on a pile of beet tops. This man who had brought 4 of his loved ones home for burial in the course of only 6 days, made caskets, dug graves, and even helped with the burial clothing. This amazing man who had never faltered nor flinched nor wavered throughout this organizing ordeal, sat down on a pile of beet tops and sobbed like a little child. Then he arose and wiped his eyes, looked up at the sky and said, "Thanks, Father, for the elders of our ward." Yes, thanks be to God for the men of the priesthood and for the service they will yet render in lifting individuals and families and in establishing Zion.